Yes.
We're doing this for the Westhoughton History Group as part of the Oral History Project. So we'd like to record your conversation today and get to know a little bit more about you and your life in Westhoughton and Tumor.
Can I comment? That's fine, so long as I don't do anything that lands me in a court case.
We'll edit it out if you do. So you're William Desmond Holden.
Yes.
And you were born when?
On the 1st of August 1922 at 147 Wigan Road, Westhoughton.
Oh, in Westhoughton, though?
Yes.
Oh. So when did you move to Tumor?
In about 1929.
Right.
Before Tumor we moved, well, my mother was only 21 when I was born. They hadn't got a lot of money. 147 Wigan Road was a council house, and we moved to a one up and one down house at White Horse.
Right.
336 Manchester Road, and stayed there until I was about 7. And I went to school, started going to school at White Horse Church of England Primary School.
Yes.
Where I first met, saw the girl who became my wife.
That's
some years later.
That's the one that's the nursery now.
That's right,
yes,
Lilyfoot,
yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. My mother and father both came from Tumor. My dad was born in Chalsegate Lane, and my mother was born at 36 Nook Gate, which is sometimes called Tumor Nook.
Right.
I never knew my father's parents. They were both dead when I was born. I knew my mother's grandfather, my grandfather John Hume, very well. I can just about remember my mother's mother, Esther Whittle she was called, but very, very vaguely. But we went back to live, well, they went back to live, I went back to live for the first time to 23 St John's Road in Tumor.
Right.
And then started to go to school from there to Lostock Junction School, because the school that my mother and father had been to, the Tumor School, had been closed by then.
Oh, right.
So we went into Lostock.
How big a school was that?
How big?
A village school?
It was a village school up to the age of 11,
yeah.
And then you had to go to either a secondary school or, as I went to, the Bolton School.
Yeah.
Well, I was trying to reckon up the other day, there were probably about 50 children from Tumor went to Lostock, and an equal number, perhaps slightly more, from Lostock village itself, so there'd be just over 100 children.
Really? So big? So so you'd have separate classrooms you want to? We
had 3 teachers actually, a headmaster, well I had 2 headmasters whilst we were there, a Mr Jump, and I've forgotten them for the moment, I've forgotten the name of the other, and 2 other teachers, a Miss Battersby, who came from Wingates I think, and a Miss Pilkington, who came from Dean, a young one. So we had 3 teachers.
Yeah.
It was quite a good school, I think.
Yeah. You seem to have done well with that.
Yeah.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I didn't know.
No,
I was the only one.
Right.
Well, as I say, one of the problems, of course, was that we had to travel back. There were no school meals then, so we had to travel backwards and forwards every day for lunch.
Oh, did you?
From school, from Lostock to Tumor.
Oh, right. So the school to home?
To home at Tumor,
right,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Not much traffic on the roads then. We used to play with hoops and spinning tops and playing bobbers with marbles and things.
Did you? Right.
So it was quite no bad memories of it.
What was everybody hard up or?
Well, I would say it was basically a lower middle class society. Most of the women if they were, well, there was, behind the house where we lived, there was W.H. Holland's mill, which had been originally, I think, some sort of a textile mill,
Oh,
but
right.
it then turned into being a soapworks.
Ah.
And my two aunties who lived at Newgate, who weren't married then, they both worked in this mill. They used to mix all the ingredients for the soap, mainly dry soap,
Oh, right.
but they also had sort of tablet soap. And occasionally my mother worked there to help. My father's, no, to write this up, my father's brother's, my father's father's brother
Right.
worked at this mill, and he had two children, one called Mary Alice and one called Ben. And Mary Alice was in charge of an unusual thing for a soap factory. She used to make lemon cheese.
Right. Sideline.
But it was very, very well hygienically done. They turned what had been the old mill race into the place where they made it, and it was all tile, beautifully tiled and
Yeah.
beautifully kept. So, well, I can talk about Tumor whilst
Yes,
we're
of
there.
course,
Okay,
yes.
right. So I lived, as I said, at 23 St John's Road. The house is still there. There was another row of houses across the road. The first shop in that row was the house was a shop, a little grocer's shop, which belonged to my mother's aunt Margaret and her daughter and son-in-law. And then going towards Lostock, on the left-hand side there was a row of houses who had some unusual residents in it, and it was called the Cinderland. Now, why it was called Cinderland, I don't know. But I found it actually on an old Ordnance Survey map, and I think Mrs. Clark, she has found it as well. And it was still called Cinderland when I was there in the 1930s.
Right.
At the end of that row, on the left-hand side, there was a big house called Prospect House, where a Major Carter lived, presumably ex-army. He owned some horses, which we all thought were race horses, but I don't think they were. But his daughter Peggy used to ride one round the village. Other notable places, there was, as I say, it was mainly lower middle class, but most of the men worked either in the factory, because there's the Holland's mill at Lostock, which is a very big one.
What was that then? Cotton?
Cotton, yeah.
Yes. And what did your father do?
And my dad was he was a winding engineman. He worked.
Yes.
He had worked various places. When he came back out of the forces, he went to Stotts first of all to train as being a cooper.
Right.
But then he transferred to being a blacksmith. But then he gave that up and he went to work not at the actual Pretoria pit, but a pit using the same sort of coal fields area.
Mm.
But then he moved to Victoria Colliery, Three Pigeons as we call it, become a winder.
Yes.
Before that, actually, whilst I was, sorry, I've jumped a bit.
Sorry.
When we still lived at White Horse, that was the time of the big strike, the 1926 strike. When I was only 4 or 5 then. But I remember the house next door having a soup kitchen for the people who hadn't got any jobs.
Yeah.
And helping my dad go and look for bits of coal on. There used to be a pit rock going up Snidel called the Brig. It was the Brigadier Pit. We used to go looking for bits of coal on there during the strike.
Yeah.
Anyway, going there, further on then when we went to Tumor, as I said, the men worked either in the pits or mills, and I suppose the women did as well.
Did your mother work?
Yeah, well, when she first got married, she worked as an assistant at the co-op shop at Wingates.
All right.
But then, well, I was born in 1922, so she didn't work there very long. I was only 21. And then, as I say, she occasionally went back to work at the saltworks behind where we lived.
Right.
Although, in my grandfather's family, then my grandfather was still living. He lived till 1938, and he was 80 something. He had a son and 2 unmarried daughters who lived at home.
Right.
But they all worked. So my mother really got the job of, we weren't very far away, going looking after her father.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was her work more than working at the saltworks. There was another quite a well-known house called the Red House, which was quite a big, I suppose, successful small holding belonging to the Howcroft family. That's now been since demolished and built over. And then going further round, there was the bottom end of the village called Pocket Nook, which was going towards a farm. I think that was Monk's Farm. It could have been anyway, somewhere I used to play as a youngster. And then there was it used to go up a path to the Snidel water tower, which is at the top.
Yes.
And one of my uncles used to live in Pocket Nook, and I think this is what Pam wants to know about Pocket Nook, because that's where our family came from. And then there was another house called, can't remember its name now. It was a very big house originally, but it had been split up into 3. And one of them, the lady who was the housing secretary for Westhoughton Urban District Council lived. So that was basically it. We just went to school there.
Yeah.
When somehow or other I got involved in taking exams, and to my amazement won a scholarship to go to Bolton School.
And did anybody else pass the scholarship at the same time as you?
Not to go to Bolton School. The most other people have got to was they could either go to White Bank,
yes,
or they could go to what was the municipal secondary school, which was in the centre of Bolton.
Yes. Yes.
Whatever, or just off
Great Street.
That's right, yeah.
I went there.
Did you? Well, as I say, I finished up going to Bolton School.
Yeah.
Quite unexpectedly, and a little bit stressful, because my mother and dad, well, they hadn't got much money, and the thought of having to go to this very posh school where I had to go for an oral examination was a little bit...
They'd be very proud of you, though.
Well, they probably were, but they were a bit worried as well.
Yeah.
Because I think I've told Pam this before, the only boy I ever knew to start with before I went there, who went to Bolton School, was called Chummy Morris Edwards, and he was the son of the Edwards of Bromley and Edwards, who were quite well fixed money-wise and lived in a big house at the bottom of Lostock Lane, and had a model railway in his garden and all sorts of things.
Oh, crikey.
So it was a bit off-putting anyway.
You talked a little bit, before we got to Bolton School, you talked a bit about Tumor.
Yes.
Did you find it rural? Did you, were there much work on the farms? Or?
Well, yes. I did work out once. There were 5 or 6 farms in Tumor then. There weren't many people worked full-time on the farms, apart from the farmers who all owned their families.
Yes.
Well, my dad occasionally, when they started having holidays without pay, he used to go and help in haymaking or harvesting, whatever the right time was. But generally speaking, the families seemed to be capable of running their own farms, but they were very successful. The well, as I said, the men worked in the pits. Locally, there was the Three Pigeons at Hunger Hill, but there was also the Starkey pit, which was between Tumor and White Horse, where the houses now, but where the metal box used to be. And that was quite a successful pit called the Starkey, and quite a few people worked there.
Mm.
They also seem to be one of the main suppliers of coal for coal-fired ships, because just outside Tumor itself, on the north side, I suppose, there was a siding which had been built for coal wagons to be parked.
Right.
And I don't suppose all the coal came from the Starkey, but a lot of it did. And whenever there was any activity for fueling coal-burning steamboats in Liverpool, they used to pick the coal wagons up from Tumor and take them there. I had an uncle. Well, he was my dad's cousin, but he also married my mother's sister, so he became my uncle as well. And he always used to say that nobody in Tumor ever went short of coal.
Right. Were you did you feel self-contained in Tumor? Were the shops? And...
Oh yes, yes. There was well, as I say, my mother's Aunt Margaret and her daughter and son had a grocers. There was a co-op shop.
Was there?
Cooperative Wholesale Society. There were two types of co-op then. There was the Friendly and the United.
Yeah.
I think they were Friendly.
Where would that be then?
Well, it's still there, the building's still there. Going from here into Tumor, past Newgate on the left, underneath the motorway now.
Yeah. Right at the end, before there's a sharp right-hand bend, the court was next to the Westhoughton, the Tumor Wesleyan Chapel. Right.
And the building's still there. It's been turned into flats. And then there's the Westhoughton, the Tumor Chapel next to it,
mm-hmm.
and then a little bit of spare ground, and then there was a pub on the corner called the Black Horse. Because at those times there were two pubs. There's a Wellington, which is still there, and the Black Horse.
So this is not far from the Wellington then, is it?
Well, no, there's a Wellington, and then there's a row of cottages.
Yes.
And then there's what used to be the co-op, and then the Wesleyan Chapel, and then a bit of spare land, which I think is land belonging to the chapel, and then what used to be the Black Horse. And I don't remember any other shops actually. Oh, yes, there was actually. Coming back this way, just after you've gone under the motorway, there's what used to be a farm, Duckworth's Farm, but now has been turned into residential home. And then there's two buildings on the right-hand side, and one of them used to be a baker's called Butterfields, and they used to have a van, and they used to go every lunchtime with pasties and pies and sandwiches and things to the mill at Lostock to give the workers there their lunches at lunchtime. When we worked there, when we lived there wasn't a newsagent. There is now. There's been a little general shop, but there was a man who did his own newspaper round, but he didn't have a shop.
Right. Did you have to go into Westhoughton or Bolton for anything?
Well, yes, if we wanted clothes, Westhoughton more than Bolton, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think the parents had enough money to go far. But we used to have an account. Well, an account. One of these things that they don't do now. You used to pay so much a week, and then when you got enough money, you went and bought
like
something.
A club.
That's right.
Club, yes.
And the shop we used to go to for men's clothes certainly was Sam Horrocks, which is a shop that is where, or was where, the chemist is now on the corner of Church Street and Central Drive. And the other place we went to, my dad did, was, my mother used to go occasionally. There was a co-op ladies shop where in Market Street, where the Brookies is now. And next to that was Dick Bullow's ironmongers. And my dad used to sole and mend all his shoes, and he used to send me there to get bits of leather to do that with.
And how did you get there?
By bike.
By bike. You were rich.
Well, no.
Borrowed bike.
I got a little bike, two-wheeler bike, unexpected one Christmas, when I'd be about 8 or 9. And then when I was going to Bolton School, the problem was to get there. There's no way I could go by bus because I'd have to go into Bolton and then out again on the tram. And it was too far to walk, so they bought me a BSI 3-speed racing bike.
This was to go to?
This was Bolton School.
Go to school.
And I used to go to Bolton School on the bike every day and come home for my lunch.
Did you?
There and back 4 times a day. Sometimes I used to go up and onto Cholliney Road and then ride down. And sometimes there's a path that goes alongside the Middlebrook that brings you out at the pocket in the bottom end of Dean, and we could go that way. So depending what the weather was like and how time was. So
when you went to Bolton School, you wouldn't be able to get your uniform in Westhoughton, would you?
No, we had to get it. No, we had to get it. It was quite expensive.
Yes, I'm sure.
No, I'll tell you in a minute. Len Tobbett's, I think it was.
Oh yes, on Bradshawgate.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
That would be a big occasion, wouldn't it?
Oh, it was, yes. Yes, we had to have the full uniform then. We had to go everywhere. Even when you weren't at school, you had to wear your cap.
Did you?
Anyway,
you'd break the bank then, wouldn't you?
Well, yes. There was a bit of bullying went on, but not much. And it was a 3-form entry actually when I went there. Shelley was where I went. That was all scholarship people. Shelby was people from the junior school, and Chelsea were paying pupils. And there were only about 16 or 17 in each class, I think. In fact, I know all the names. One or two well-known people.
Go on, who were they?
Ronnie Cheadle, who was the son of Frank Cheadle, who became the mayor of Bolton, who Cheadle Square in Bolton is named after, who lived at Overdale, which is now the crematorium. He sadly he like me, went in the Air Force and he was killed. Brian Rowley, whose father was Walter Rowley, who was coach and manager of Bolton Wanderers then, so he was quite well known.
Well, yeah.
A chap called Dennis Corley Smith, D.C. Smith, whose family had been to Bolton School before. In fact, his elder brother was an ambassador or somebody in one of the British outposts in one of the South African countries. I've forgotten which one now, and he was held hostage for some time.
All right.
But Dennis eventually became a Reuters correspondent and went to the Vietnam War and wrote a book called 2 Drops of Blood.
All right.
And the other one, the more famous one, was Harry Whittle, who was my closest friend actually, who became the captain of the 1948 athletics Olympic team in London. He eventually became the director of ICI, but sadly died of dementia at a quite early age. Other people who did become famous was Bob Haslam, who became Lord Haslam, who became a governor of Bolton School. I never knew Ian McKellen, but I knew of him, but he was a lot younger. I think that was basically it to the people. Somebody called Jeff Banks, who was a very good actor as he was at school, and he appeared on television and on radio quite a few times with I've forgotten the name now. I remember it, but it was two men acting as women. And he was in there act as well on television.
Did you keep in touch with any of them? With it being such a small school?
Not really, because the war split us up,
Yeah.
you see. I stayed on. I took a school certificate in 1936 when I was only 14.
Oh. Normally 16, was
yeah.
it? Yeah. Oh, you were a bright boy.
Then I took higher school certificate 2 years later. I was Poskett, who was the headmistress then, was intent on me going to either Oxford or Cambridge, I think where he came from. But in order to do that then you had to have school certificate in Latin. So he tried to make me do Latin into school certificate standard in 12 months, but I didn't make it.
Oh dear.
And I didn't get a scholarship either. I took high school certificate twice and I got 3 distinctions and something. But there were only 4 term scholarships available then, and I didn't get one. So I left then in 1940 and I went to work at a chemical defence research establishment at St Helens, Sutton Mine, St Helens. And stayed there until Easter 41.
Yeah.
During that time I got 2 mustard gas burns and a ruined throat from brome, inhaling bromine. So I decided not to have the Air Force.
Yeah, but they didn't call you up when you were 18, or?
Well, no, because when I went to, I was only 18. I turned 18 in 1940. If I'd stayed any longer and not been in a reserved occupation, I would have been called up as my friends did. But when I went to this defence establishment, I was in a reserved occupation, so I could have stayed there if I wanted to. But I didn't.
So where do you say that was?
Sutton Manor, St Helens.
St Helens. On your bike?
Oh no. No, I had to stay there overnight. I had lodgings for weekdays and then came on a weekend on the train. I think I got £2.15 a week then, and I had to out of that I had to pay my train fares and all my meals and the lodgings at this place I was staying at. A very nice couple, Evans they were called. They came to our wedding actually, but I hadn't got much money left after that.
And were you courting during this time?
No, not courting exactly. Well, going back, as I said, I met Annie when we were both 5 at Whitehorse Primary School.
Mm.
But when I moved to Tumor, of course, I lost contact with her. But I kept in contact with a family called Jolly. And Fred Jolly was a bit older than me, 2 or 3 years older, but we're very friendly. There's a photograph in there of us at Blackpool. He started playing tennis and I started playing tennis at Dean Conservative Club with friends from Bourne School. And he said, "Oh, you want to come and play with me?" So that's when I came down here. When in 1936, 7ish, Annie's sister Alice had the tennis court made for her for her 21st birthday in 1935.
Oh.
And it had become just a family business really, but there were so many people about. So it got quite, and in fact I think in those books you'll find there's photographs.
So where was this?
Where we are now.
Oh, here?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
I'll show you a photograph in a minute. So I came down in 1930, end of 36 I think, when I was just turned 14, and so was Annie. And I remember saying, "Oh, I remember you." But of course we were friendly as a gang, We used to do everything together. We used to play tennis till it was going dark almost on Saturdays, and then go as a group, I don't know, a dozen of us, to the rink. Do you remember the rink?
I've heard of it, yes.
Which was an old cinema off Church Street, which had wooden floors.
Yeah.
And we were always late getting there. And they always used to say, "Oh, it's that low lot arriving here." But upset everybody, clattering about on these wooden floors, getting late to the pits. But we went together, and we never actually went. Annie and I never went. We wrote to one another, and we never went out on our own together until 1941. Well, October 1941, when. That's another story, but I managed to get home on a very quick night's leave from Wilmslow. We were on our way to America then, and I came home and came down to see Annie. I've been home as well, and I came down to see Annie. And as I was going out, I said, "I've got to go now and catch a bus," and Annie said, "I'm going with him." And that was the first time that we ever went out together on our own.
The rest is history.
Yeah.
Oh.
That had a funny ending too. The Lincoln bus, it went from Whitehorse and it stopped at Swinton, so I had to hitch a lift to get to Manchester to catch the train to go to Wilmslow. Fortunately, there was a very kindly post office van picked me up.
So where was Annie in this? She wasn't, she wasn't going to Wilmslow with you?
No, I left her at the bus stop so
right.
I could come back on the road.
Right.
And I got on the train and got to Wilmslow. Well, my pass expired at midnight. I think it was about 1 o'clock in the morning then. Fortunately, there were 2 or 3 others on, so we broke into the camp through a back door.
So by that time you joined the RAF?
I was in the Air. Well, I joined the Air Force.
Yeah.
As I said, I volunteered in Easter 1941. Went to the place in Bolton first of all, and then they sent me down to Cardington for an air crew, because all air crew were volunteers, for an air crew assessment. So I had a physical and mental test there, and they found out that I was in reserved occupation. So they took me on immediately, swore me in and gave me the shilling and said, "Right, you can have a special week's leave to sort things out and go back and sort it out," which I did. And then
what did your parents think of that?
Well, my dad was, I thought he could understand, because he did exactly the same. He was only 17 when he joined the army in 1917. My mother wasn't very happy, but...
Well, you'd be about 1920, wouldn't you?
No, I was 1941, I was only 18.
Yeah.
Didn't turn 19 until
Right.
August 41. But, so I went down to London then on the train, and to the ACRC, RCTARC, which they call it, Aircraft Receiving Centre, St John's Wood in London, near the cricket ground. And that's where I became an AC2 in the Air Force. I met on the way, on the tube, when we were going there, a lad called Reg Howlett. And because a lot of things were done alphabetically then, we were both HO, so we stuck together from then until middle 1942.
Had you done much travelling up to this point? Was it?
No.
You hadn't been to...
No.
You've been to London before? Or?
No. Just going back,
Yeah.
sorry, out of sync. The first time I saw the sea,
Yeah.
I was 7 in 1929,
Yeah.
and that was the first time my mother had seen it as well, at Blackpool. And that was the sum total of our movements. No, I hadn't been anywhere at all on my own.
Yeah.
But coming back to Reg Howlett, as I said, we parted company in 1942. He went to one squadron and I went to another from OTU. And unfortunately, he was killed.
Oh dear.
It didn't last very long. Anyway, there's lots of Air Force, but where else do you want to go now?
Right, well, we can't go without your career in the RAF. What have you?
Oh. Well, as you've gathered, when I came over for that quick evening visit, and I had to say cheerio to Annie, we were on our way to America. It was part of the Marshall Plan, East Lend, and they were sending people all over the place to train, partly from a safety point of view and also, I suppose, expense. So we sailed from Liverpool, I don't know what the date is, probably find it sometime in November, September, October 41, in the Highland Princess, which was an old meat boat, and there were 250 of us in the hold where the meat had been, in hammocks.
Oh, lovely.
And we set sail, and some of them were sick before we cleared the Mersey. And I think the only two who weren't sick at all were Reg and myself, so we got the job of clearing everything up.
Oh dear.
Anyway, we went in a convoy actually to start with. There was an aircraft carrier in the middle and destroyers whipping round, and several of the troop ships. Actually, we found out by comparison this friend of mine, Fred Jolly, was in one of the other troop ships. He was on his way to West Africa then, but halfway across the Atlantic, we woke up one morning to find out with nothing there, only a tired looking, what turned out to be a minesweeper with us, and we went on our own the rest of the journey to Canada to forgot the name of Moncton eventually. We landed in Canada anyway, Moncton, and went by train from there to Toronto. Stayed there about 3 weeks, I think, and then we were transported down to Alabama, to Montgomery, Alabama. But up till then, of course, America weren't in the war. This was before Pearl Harbor, so we had to wear civilian clothes, which we were kitted up with at Toronto, grey flannel suits and ties and things. And then from Montgomery we went to Sutherfield, Americus in Georgia, to do our preliminary training on Stearman PT-17s. That was quite a historical place too, actually. It had been a very early airfield, and the trainer that I got there was called Eddie Sewell, and he was a real barnstorming pilot. He was fantastic. And he had certainly met, if not flown with, Wilbur and Orville Wright.
Really?
And that was in the early 1900s. But he could make a plane talk. We used to sit in the front in the cockpit, and he used to sit at the back. And we looked, and all the instruments we got was a clock, a compass, and an altimeter. And we said, well, what do we need? He said, all you've got there you need to get you back in time for coffee.
Right.
I said, well, what about speed? He said, you fly by the seat of your pants. And that's what you had to do. You could feel from your seat of your pants whether you were flying or not. Well, we flew there successfully. I've got a book all about this somewhere if you want to look at it. We were 42E we were, and we reckon that was, we were due to finish as the A, B, C, D, E, the fifth group in 1942. But of course we were the last ones who went before America was in the war. Everything changed after that.
Of course,
but
yeah.
From when we were at Southern, we were completely on our own, just Air Force, no Americans there at all, apart from the civilian instructors and a couple of the United States Army Air Force instructors. But from then on, we went to where the the American Air Force were training, and that was tough. Oh,
You join in with...
oh yes.
Right.
Real strict discipline. You weren't allowed to do this, you weren't allowed to do that. If somebody asked you a question, there were only three answers: yes or no, so no excuse, sir. That's all you could say. Take those slimy green eyes off me. And they used to come round with white gloves on, looking for dust everywhere. We had showers then. There hadn't got to be a drop of water in the showers when we left it. They used to come round with protractors and rulers, measuring the size of your pillows and the angle of your the fold on your sheets. They don't know anything about discipline at all. Anyway, we managed it, so we went there to Selma, I think it was first of all, Craigfield, Selma, and then I've forgotten the name of the field now. I've got it written down somewhere. Macon. That was quite a famous place. It was where the Gone with the Wind film was supposed to be from. And then we finished up at Montgomery, back again to Alabama, and that's where we qualified and got our wings.
Right.
We got American wings, and I've still got a pair of those somewhere. They were metal ones, not cloth ones. And amongst all this, of course, a lot of people had failed. I mean, they were very tough on standards of passing. I think by the time we qualified, I think we'd done about 60 hours flying, quite a lot of it at night and in formation and doing gunnery practice and bombing practice. And at that time, the pilots going into the Air Force from the UK training, they'd only got about 20 hours flying. They'd not learnt at all.
No.
Anyway, we went back up to Moncton on the train, and the first thing we got when we were paraded on the platform was a Canadian sergeant major saying, "Take those tin things off and go and get some proper wings on." So we had to go and get a pair of proper wings. They're in there if you want to look at them. And then we came back from I've forgotten the name of the port again, on what had been a Polish cruise liner, the Batory. We came back on that and landed in Gorok in Glasgow, and then down to Bournemouth, to a big block of flats that they commandeered for accommodation. And we sat there for, I don't know how long, a fortnight or so, kicking our heels. They sent us on leave one night, Friday night, and on the Sunday we got a telegram saying go back again. So we've got one night's leave.
Oh, so what do you do with the one night's leave?
Well, funnily enough, sadly enough, Annie wasn't here. She was in Yorkshire with a friend of hers, so I went to the pictures with a friend of mine. After that, we stuck again for a fortnight in Bournemouth before we went anywhere. And we transferred to Cirencester, South Cerney, to be converted from single engine planes to twins onto airspeed Oxfords. We weren't there very long, a few weeks. And then transferred to 102U, number 1 operational training unit, where we were going to be trained for actually flying proper aeroplanes. That was at Bicester. And transferred them from airspeed Oxfords to Blenheims. And that's where we picked our crews up. We flew first of all in Blenheim 1s, which were quite different from Blenheim 4s, which had a cockpit at the front, well, place at the front for the navigator. And we went, we met our crews, we chose our own crews, hopefully. We met at a place called Hinton in the Hedges, which was a satellite to Bicester, and my navigator and wireless operator gunner had met before and they'd teamed up and they started looking for a pilot, and they chose me. So I was quite happy with that. So we finished our operational training unit at Bicester, and then we were posted to a squadron. We went to 21 Squadron at Westhoughton in Norfolk, which was very odd because it was just outside the village where Annie's mother had been born.
Right.
And we went to fly Venturas, and I've just been looking at my logbook. Actually, we're only there, I think I only flew 6 hours, because suddenly out of the blue we got another posting. We were being posted, we eventually found, to the Middle East, to Cairo. And very fortunate we didn't stay on 21 Squadron, which was very lucky because they'd changed from Blenheims to Venturas, which were a terrible aeroplane, too heavy, and it wouldn't fly on one engine, it was slow, and they had very severe losses. In fact, on one raid on Philips Eindhoven Works, I think it was, in Holland, they lost them all. They weren't all killed, but they were all shot down. I remember Matt saying to me that somebody up there is looking after us, mate.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we were posted to go to Takoradi. So we went back to Liverpool again to get on a board, and this time it was a sister ship of the one that we'd been on before, the Highland Princess, I think, or whichever one it was. So we sailed from there to Sierra Leone, Freetown in Sierra Leone, where there were a lot of other people on board it, and the ones who were the aircrew were all changed from that to a merchant cruiser, and from there we went to Takoradi. And we stayed in Takoradi for a bit, a transit camp, and eventually we flew as passengers up to Cairo. And the basic idea was that we were reinforcements for the Alamein push. But before we got there, the Alamein push had finished and the German army was virtually defeated. So they got about 30 or 40 aircrews and nothing to do with them.
Right.
And in amongst all that, most of us, got yellow jaundice, but I didn't get mine until later. Other things happened. I volunteered for a job. We were in canvas in Cairo, and it wasn't. So I volunteered for a job, thinking all the crew would go, but in fact it wasn't. It was just me. They just wanted a pilot to go down to Khartoum and Wadi Halfa to pick up a Blenheim, which somehow or other landed there, and the crew had gone off or something, I don't know. But what they were doing actually was called number 1 ADU, one aircraft delivery unit, and the Blenheims were leading flights of Spitfires and Hurricanes from Khartoum. They'd flown across actually from West Africa and then up the Nile, and they wanted somebody to lead them up. So that was the job I got, to fly a Blenheim up from Khartoum and Wadi Halfa up to Cairo to get these fighter aircraft landed safely. But one of the crews that had been with us, they'd been transferred to BOAC, British Overseas Aircraft Corporation, because as I said, they got lots of aircraft and nothing to do with them. And I met them, and they said, "Oh, don't go back under canvas. We've got a flat in Heliopolis. Come and stay there."
Very nice.
But whilst I was there, I finished up getting jaundice, so I finished up in hospital. By then, my crew had already had it and been cleared, and they were back in the transit camp under canvas. Anyway, I got convalescent and went to Tel Aviv actually, and stayed there in Palestine for a fortnight, and then came back and met up with my crew again, and then we were posted to Aden. We sailed down to Aden Cormac's at Hayden, and stayed there. That will be in early 1943. We stayed there until March, I think it was 1944. All the dates in that long book, but I can't remember them all. And our job there was to sort of a coastal command job, because there were Jap submarines operating between the bottom end of the Persian Gulf, where of course there were tankers coming down, and also there's a lot of troop ship movement from Aden going across to India, and eventually I suppose to Japan, but India and Sri Lanka as it is now, Ceylon. And one or two ships had been attacked and sunk, so we were looking for Jap submarines. So we did our flying from Aden up the Arabian coast. There were airfields up there, Rian, Salalah and Masira Island on the Arabian coast, and on the other side, on the Somaliland coast side, there was Bandar Qasim, which was on the coast, Socotra, which was a little island off the end of North Africa, and then an inland Scotiaban airfield in the middle of, well, not in the middle, but in towards the centre of Somaliland. So that's what we did. We did pre-dawn takeoffs and night landings and all sorts of things. Look, the problem, of course, was a lot of these, well, the tankers certainly, they wouldn't go in convoy because they could sail faster than the slowest ship in a convoy. So they tried to go on their own, and we'd not much contact with them. So we used to have to go out looking for them first of all before we could do any protection of them. So whether it was a simple tanker or a convoy, what we had to do was to do square searches in front of them to make sure that there was no Jap submarines on either side of them or in front of them, which was a tricky job for the navigator to do, because we had to keep changing courses and speeds, and when the weather was fine, it was fine, but we were there quite a lot on the monsoon period when the clouds were low, it was pouring with rain, it was windy, and the only way we could do any good at all was to be below the cloud. So we had to be down about 500 feet doing all this and looking for periscope. We did actually see one once. It was funny, it was a cool, a calm day, and we were flying back, and unfortunately we hadn't got any depth charges on, because we used to do provision flights taking goods to these other satellites, and we got nothing. But we noticed this sort of herringbone pattern going along, and then it suddenly disappeared, and we knew it was a U-boat periscope. Well, we radioed in and gave them our position, and they sent a boat out. I think a Canadian crew a night or so after that did sink a U-boat. Well, it wasn't a U-boat, it was a Jap boat. So we had one or two
And how did you manage to keep in touch with Annie at this period? No.
Well, occasional letters, all censored letters.
Yeah.
I did get, we did keep in touch whilst I was in Ed, because we were there for a long time.
Yeah.
It was when I kept moving about that was the trouble.
Yes.
We had one or two near-do's, I think it was the first or second time we did one of these anti-sub patrols. I had to force land. We'd been out, but we had about enough fuel for a 7.5 hours flight, and we'd been doing this. It was supposed to be a late night, coming dusk landing. We'd been out for 6.5 hours, and we lost contact with Scotiaban. It was this airfield that was away from the coast, so there's no sort of roads or rails or buildings or anything to pick up. It was just bare land, and we couldn't get in touch with them, and we got lost. So I had to decide what to do. We hadn't got enough petrol to go anywhere else, and the light was going. So we decided I better force land. So I flew low and picked what I thought was a nice flat bit, and decided I'd land with the wheels down, not wheels up, which I did, and we survived. I broke the tail wheel, I think, but they actually got the natives round to clear the thing, and they bended the tail wheel and took it off and brought it back. So at the same time, actually, another aeroplane had landed, force landed on the beach with his wheels up, and he'd written that one off. But I got, where is it? I got the thing in there. There you are. Endorsement, carelessness, because of faulty navigation. I said I wondered if he'd got any idea of what it was like to be flying for 6.5 hours. Not knowing where you were.
As well.
Anyway, we had one or two other narrow escapes after that. But eventually, they decided to replace the Blenheims in Bisleys, they were called, the Blenheim Fives, in Aden by Wellingtons. And they were going to split my crew up, because I was going to go as second pilot, second dicky on a Wellington, and I said, no way, I'm not going second dicky to anybody. So I made a strong plea to the CO that, look, we've been trained as a crew, and we wanted to stay as a crew. He said, well, I'll see what I can do, but first, 3 of these Blenheims are going to be flown back to Cairo. Why on earth they needed to do that, I don't know, because they weren't going to break them up when they got there. Anyway, the 3 of us set off, me and my crew together, and 2 other Blenheims. We weren't in formation, but we were together. We went via Asmar, I think, in Eritrea, and then Khartoum. Wadi Half, I think. Anyway, after the last time, we were all together flying along, and then we'd only been airborne about half an hour, I think. And Matt said, we've got problems, Bill, he called me. I said, what's the matter? He said, we've got an oil leak in the port engine. It was streaming out of all across the wing.
Careless again.
Well, no, that was the ground crew who done that, not me. But the problem was that the plane won't fly on one engine.
Yeah.
So I had to feather that one. We were stuck on one. And so what to do then? We were still these 3 rounds, so we could contact them. We said we're going to have to force land. We contacted AHQ Cairo, where we were, told them we were force landing. This time I had to land with wheels up, not down. And we did, managed it. The front perspex had shattered as we got down, and we were all covered in sand. But fortunately, they were very lucky, it didn't set on fire, because we got quite a lot of tank full in our wings, but we couldn't, well, we hadn't got time to jettison it, so we just had to risk it. Anyway, we landed okay.
Sounds like you had a very lucky time.
I did, yes.
Yes.
So we knew we were somewhere on the Nile bank at Calm, I think it was called, the place. And then we suddenly saw a whole crowd of people coming towards us, all in white galabeers and whatnot. We didn't know where we were, or whether we were in friendly or whatnot.
Oh.
But bulk of them stopped, and 2 started walking towards us on their own, so I thought, well, that's a good sign. And one was a tall chap and the other was a small chap. And the small one turned out to be the head of the village. And he'd been, before the war, he'd been training as an electrical engineer in Germany, France and Britain. And he spoke a bit of English and French and German, and I could speak both, so we got on fairly well, and we made friends, and they were very welcome. So they adopted us, and that night we were taken to the village, and Matt and I were sitting around this sort of campfire, and there were a lot of activity behind us, and there were goats being pushed about, and we had one of those for our supper. And whilst we were sitting around after we'd had our supper, they passed the hookah round, so we all had to have a puff at the hookahs as well. Well, we were very looked after, and the building actually was quite. I didn't tell you actually. The last time place we called before we forced landing, we picked up a passenger, an airman who somehow or other got himself to Khartoum and wanted to get back to Cairo, so he'd come with us. But unfortunately, he had to force land with us. So there were 4 of us there. And well, we presumed that somebody or other, having 2 other aircraft had seen us land, knew where we were. We contacted AHU, somewhere or other, somebody get a message to us, but nothing happened for a day or 2. And we wanted to get out, so we asked the chief, could we get out? And he gave us a 6-foot Nubian soldier to look after us. Wherever we went, he went. He took us once, actually, this chief took us to a sugar beet factory, which was on the railway, but there were no trains running, so we couldn't get back that way. So eventually we decided we were going to have to look at getting a boat and sailing back down the Nile, because it was too far to walk back. Well,